Geoff Neal versus Santiago Ponzinibbio in the welterweight division. This one is extremely interesting because there are some outside factors in this one. Because, look, on the one hand, you've got Santiago Ponzinibbio, who was an absolute killer like a few years ago, if you remember, when he was coming up, right? But then in 2018, he got very ill. He got very ill and he's come back and he hasn't looked quite the same since. He dropped a decision to Jiang Liang, who just recently got picked up and slammed and choked out by Khamzat Chimaev. And he did actually then come back and he got a decision win over Miguel Baeza, which is actually a fairly impressive win. But we haven't seen this wrecking machine Ponzinibio that we used to see prior to 2018. I do think that watching those two fights, that with respect, you know, that illness has taken something out of him. He doesn't look quite the same. I'm hoping maybe we can see that same fighter come back at some point, but as it stands at the moment, I just haven't seen it. On the other hand, you've got Geoff "Hands of Steel" Neal. Geoff Neal, he's a really, really good striker. He was on an absolute streak before he started fighting. Like, he fought Josh Thompson, not Josh Thompson. Yeah, it's Josh Thompson. He fought Wonderboy, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Sorry, I was thinking Josh Thompson. No, that's bloody the guy that knocked out Nate Diaz with that head kick, isn't he? Who does that podcast with Big John McCarthy now. So yeah, sorry, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He's one of the best in the welterweight division. Like, historic, he's just very, very good. And there's no shame in that loss, really. And he also got. But before he lost that fight, I would say he was on a real streak. He got knockouts over Mike Perry, Nico Price and Camacho, all knockouts. And he got a rear naked choke on Brian Camozzi. Like, the guy is a finisher. He's a really good finisher who is on a little bit of a rough patch. But he's been fighting some really good competition. Because look, like I said, the only losses that he's got since... since Kevin Holland at Extreme Knockout 34, wasn't even in the UFC, but that was 2017. The only losses he's had since 2017 to Stephen Thompson and Neil Magny, both unanimous decisions. He just got outpointed by two fighters who are extremely good at outpointing people, with respect. Like, that's what Neil Magny and Stephen Thompson do. They outpoint people. They're experts at it. So there's no real shame in either of those losses. What I would say is that we have seen in the news very recently that Geoff Neal, he got a DUI, got arrested on weapons charges as well, but only because he had a weapon in the car. I don't know the details of the case haven't really come out. It's like, how far over the limit was he, X, Y, and Z. But what strikes me is like, well, what was he doing then? Because if he was out partying, then he wasn't training for this fight, was he? So how much of a distraction is being arrested, being locked up, having it come out into the news? How much of a distraction is that from your training? I feel like that really is going to play a factor here. I don't think it's going to play enough of a factor though, because I just feel like whilst getting that decision over Miguel Baeza was pretty good for Ponzinibio his last time out, and he's, and maybe he's just warming back into the fighter that he once was. Or maybe that fighter isn't there anymore. We don't know. We just don't know until we see it. All I can say is we haven't seen that. But what I think is going to happen here is it's going to be a largely stand-up battle. And Geoff Neal has got some hands on him. He has got some hands on him. I think Ponzinibio is going to be trying to trade with him, but I feel like he's just a half a step slower than he used to be. Just a half a step, just a smidge, right? But just that little half a step is going to put him to sleep, because Geoff Neal, if he clocks you, if he connects, you're going to sleep. That's just happening. So you're getting 2.75 on the knockout here for Geoff Neal, who is coming in as a very slight underdog, I would add. But that's where I'm going with this one. I just feel like Ponzinibio, until I see him fighting the way that he used to fight before he got ill, I'm going to assume that fighter isn't really there anymore, unfortunately. And that is sad, because look, Ponzinibio was an absolute murderer at one point. And I kind of hope that we can see that again. But I think for the time being, the safer bet is Geoff Neal to get the knockout, 2.75. That is going on the bet slip. I will be breaking down the main event. That's going to be on the Patreon. So obviously, Charles Oliveira versus Dustin Poyer, one of the most anticipated main events of the year. Absolutely cannot wait for it. I've got a lot to say on that main event. There's a lot to look into, a lot of factors to consider. I've broken it all down, and it's a really good breakdown. It's well worth the £1 entry on the old Patreon there. So if you've got any interest in that, please head on over. It just goes to support the podcast, trying to make this thing better, just to keep going from strength to strength. And I appreciate any and all support. Thank you very much. So